Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic. Let's do it. What's the most horrifying death you've ever heard of? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
I have two. One was the father of my high school classmate. His dad worked on a county construction crew. He was working to repair a broken water main. While in the hole, the walls collapsed. He was crushed. But the worst part was that in their panic to rescue him, the backhoe started tearing his flesh. He died in excruciating pain. The second was a 2-year-old girl. Her father was watching her overnight. The girl woke up and wouldn't stop crying. He took her outside at 2 a.m. in the dead of winter in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and just left her in the woods near their home. She froze to death. The scene was peppered with her toddler footprints, which means that she wandered around lost, alone, and frightened in her last hours before her death. As a young adult, my mother told me the story of why her mother went her entire life without eating raisins. When my maternal grandmother was a child, one of her uncles worked in a factory that produced raisins. He apparently got locked inside one of the dehydrators at the end of a Friday shift, and he wasn't found until the following Monday morning. Suzanne Hart, a 41-year-old executive at Young and Rubicam, was crushed between the doors and a wall of a malfunctioning 85-year-old elevator in 2011 in Manhattan. The elevator began moving, with the doors still open, catching her as she was boarding, and pulling her apart in front of two of her horrified coworkers. It took rescue workers an hour to free the survivors, meaning they were in the elevator with Ms. Hart's remains the entire time. As someone who spent a major part of their professional life working in buildings like that, I would think about that every time I got in an elevator. Career maintenance guy at a local sawmill retired. A few years and upgrades later, his grandson is training in his old position when the current maintenance guy gets badly injured and can't work anymore. This was a smaller mill, so they had one trained maintenance guy and a couple of helpers. Anyway, old guy gets called back to help due to his experience and his grandson being the long-term replacement. Well, this leads to the poor old guy's death. The debarker needed one of the teeth replaced. When he worked there, the safety switch was on the door to the open cage this machine lived in. Door open equals no power. It had also been upgraded with a new laser activator, so when a log entered far enough, the machine triggered. This was an upgrade to reduce the risk of the operator trying to activate it early, which could lead to a partial grab. This would cause the log to get thrown out of it and could be lethal. That safety cutoff had been bypassed. No one knows for sure who did it, but between that and the new laser system, you had to fully power down the machine for maintenance instead of just triggering the safety to save time. Anyway, old guy comes in, jams the cage door open, and crawls into the mouth of the debunker. This thing ripped bark off trees using 4 large hooks that rotated round it and would do the job in seconds as the conveyor belt fed the log in. When he got in to change one of those hooks, the tooth I mentioned, he went a little too far and tripped the laser. With the bypassed safety and power still on, he was ripped to pieces almost instantly. His grandson had just caught up to him in time to witness this. Also, the story of how my dad ended up working on that very same machine. The 2 previous operators got fired the day of the accident because one of them did the safety bypass, and even if they didn't, neither reported it, which even back in the 70s was an issue when someone died over it.
I know it's early, but I'm pretty sure this will be the worst one you hear. And there's still a lot of really bad ones, but it's up to you as the listener to decide. They're all, mostly tragic and all terrible. So no animals to worry about in this one, just humans. So have a good day. Be safe.
Thunder River Rapids ride accident in 2016. Long story short, the raft of the water ride was going up a conveyor belt to return to the boarding area after the ride finished. On board were 4 adults and 2 children. 2 water pumps providing water to the area had failed, and no one noticed yet because the water sensor was also broken. An empty raft had gotten stranded at the end of the belt due to the low water levels and was immobile. The raft carrying the passengers ran into the stranded raft and flipped on its side. All 4 adults were thrown out of the raft and into the conveyor belt mechanisms, crushing them to death. The 2 children survived by holding on to their chairs for dear life as they watched their parents get caught up in the machinery. Several EMTs needed counseling after recovering the bodies because they were so disfigured. Not only did they die horribly, but their children watched, completely helpless. John Radcliffe, 7th governor of the Virginia colony. In the winter of 1609 to 1610, he was captured by the Pamunkey tribe, tied to a stake near a fire and skinned alive with mussel shells. The pieces of his skin were shown to him before they were thrown into the fire. They saved his face for last. The fire was necessary not only to burn his skin, but to keep him from dying of hypothermia during the experience. When I was training to become a lifeguard, the guy training us used to be an EMT and told us this. One time they went to respond to a car crash. This guy had had a medical episode and passed out at the wheel and crashed into a tree. They got there, and the guy had gotten out of his car and was standing next to it. He turned his head to see the EMTs and died. He had broken his neck, and when he turned around, it severed his artery, and he just dropped dead. I can't imagine the feeling of surviving a car accident and then dying when you thought you were safe. I might have gotten some details wrong about the medical stuff, like what was severed, because I was told this 5 years ago, but it still freaks me out and reminds me how serious spinal injuries are. Gary Hoy died when he fell from the 24th floor of his office building in the Toronto Dominion Centre in Toronto, Ontario. In an attempt to prove to a group of prospective articling students that the building's glass windows were unbreakable, he threw himself against the glass. The glass did not break when he hit it, but the window frame gave way and Hoy fell to his death. Wikipedia, because I'm lazy. A full car of 15-year-old girls crashed into a tree. The doors were crunched and wouldn't open but left the cabin intact. Then the car caught fire. Passerby tried to get people out of the car, and they got 3 of them out, still on fire and alive. One died that night in the hospital. The rest burnt to death, strapped to their seats. Watching people try to get them out, all of them children. 4 deaths, 2 survived, and are in critical condition. This was a week ago. The EMTs needed time off because it was that traumatizing. And EMTs have seen some shit. It was just that bad. One I heard as a kid in Mexico. Mom goes out for an errand and leaves her baby sleeping on the bed. Bed was pretty low to the ground. The back door was left open, and a pig wandered in and climbed the bed and started eating the baby from the middle. Baby's dead by the time Mom gets back home. This and watching the movie Hannibal made me terrified of pigs growing up. When pigs bite down, they move their jaws side to side, completely grinding whatever they're eating. They rarely leave much behind. Farmers that have passed out in pig pens are sometimes completely devoured, people only finding scraps of clothing or teeth shards. Literally heard it. Apparently, it is a thing to go out into nature and record sounds, possibly for documentaries, movies, and so on. Some time ago on the internet, there was this audio recording of a guy falling asleep in the forest while he was collecting such audio samples, and you can clearly hear him wake up in the middle of a bear eating him alive. You see, the problem with bears is that they don't have an instinct to kill you. They just start eating, and if you're unlucky enough that the bear starts from a non-fatal part of your body, you could be in the most excruciating pain imaginable for minutes on end. So, yeah, that was pretty dumb. Paderborn, Germany. Overzealous zookeeper Friedrich Reisfeld fed his constipated elephant Stefan 22 doses of animal laxative, and more than a bushel of berries, figs, and prunes, before he plugged up the pachyderm, finally let rip, and suffocated the keeper under 200 pounds of poop. Investigators say ill-fated Friedrich, 46, was attempting to give the ailing elephant an olive oil enema when the relieved beast unloaded on him like a dump truck full of mud. The sheer force of the elephant's unexpected defecation knocked Mr. Riesfeld to the ground, where he struck his head on a rock and lay unconscious, as the elephant continued to evacuate his bowels on top of him, said flabbergasted Paderborn police detective Eric Dern. With no one there to help him, he lay under all that dung for at least an hour before a watchman came along, and during that time he suffocated. It seems to be just one of those freak accidents that happen. Small city in Denmark, the one has haunted me for a decade. When I grew up, there was a Polish family that moved to town, and the kids were horrible. The little sister once went with her friends down to an elderly man who lived next to the nursing home, the poor old man who didn't have any family, and found joy in speaking with the young people in town. On that day, the girl went there and asked the old man for cigarettes and money, which he refused as the girl was 11 to 12 years old. She got mad at him for refusing and went home to her older brother and told him he tried to R her. The brother, who was 16 or 17 at the time, went furious and brought a golf club to the old man's house. He beat the old man repeatedly without even knowing if the accusations were true. The old man didn't die at the time of the beating, but tried to crawl for help, but was too weak to get up. 15 to 16 hours later in the morning, at home, a nurse found him with blood everywhere, on the walls, the radiator, and long stairs on the floor where he crawled. The investigation said he wasn't dead for more than a few hours when they found him, suggesting he spent the whole night trying to seek help before dying from his injuries. The boy was quickly arrested, and later the girl admitted that he was always nice to her and everybody else, and she just got mad because he didn't give her cigarettes. The boy only got 4 years in prison and was deported to Poland after. The mother and daughters essayed and murdered on a boat in Tampa Bay by Oba Chandler in 1989. After assaulting them, he tied weights around their necks and threw them overboard to be pulled into the dark depths and drowned. Autopsies showed they were likely conscious. I can't fathom the horror that poor mother especially experienced seeing this happen to her 2 girls. And the thought of being pulled into the depths in the darkness and drowning like that, it's just deeply disturbing. I'm glad they executed Oba Chandler, but they should have done to him what he did to those poor women. Rest in peace, Joan, Michelle, and Christy Rogers. The Caribbean diving disaster was an incident in February 2022 in which a group of 5 divers working for the Pariah Fuel Trading Company were sucked into a pipeline from a hyperbaric chamber. One diver managed to crawl to safety and sought help, but the other 4 were left to die, with no attempt being made to rescue them due to safety concerns of going back underwater. An investigation by the government of Trinidad and Tobago concluded that the deaths of the divers were due to gross and consequently criminal negligence, and made recommendations that charges be laid for corporate manslaughter. They weren't. Well, this happened in my town about 50 years ago. We personally know the people involved, but most of them are dead by now. So what basically happened is that a mother left her young son, about 3 years old, I think, with her sister and her mother, the boy's grandma, and there was another child in there. The 2 women were making a stew in a huge pot over a fire in the house yard. At some point, they had left both the stew and the children unattended. A few hours later, they realized the young boy was missing, and they started searching for him. That was when they looked inside the pot. The boy had somehow fallen in and couldn't get out of the boiling hot stew. He died in there, and by the time they found him, his body had disintegrated and was being cooked along with the stew. The craziest part of the whole story is that the boy's mother actually forgave them after all of this. She went on to adopt a baby girl. TLDR. Child cooked in a pot because of adult neglect. Didn't see this one, but bone cancer. The worst one being the skull that makes its way around Reddit every so often. While there are some pretty gruesome deaths in the comment section, most of these don't last months or years. I'm pretty strong-willed, but if I ever had untreatable bone cancer in any place I couldn't amputate, I would kill myself. Jennifer Daughtry murdered by the Greensburg Six. Jennifer Lee Daughtry, November 8, 1979 to February 11, 2010, was an American woman from Mount Pleasant, Pennsylvania, who was killed by a group of people later referred to as the Greensburg Six in an act of revenge. In February 2010, Daughtry, who was mentally disabled, was humiliated, tortured, essayed, and murdered by a group of individuals she considered to be her new circle of friends. Her body was wrapped in Christmas decorations, placed inside a trash can, and discarded in the parking lot of Greensburg-Salem Middle School. I used to work on a shell project in Siberia. Not far from our site, a bus full of 29 construction workers broke down on a remote road. It was minus 40 Celsius, minus 40 Fahrenheit outside. The engine died, and instead of going outside to make a fire, even though there was wood all around, they stayed inside the bus hoping it would get better. They all froze to death. They didn't try to save themselves. Maybe they panicked. Maybe they just waited too long. But that story stuck with me because they could have survived. Truls Hellevik. This man was on a team of 4 saturation divers in the case titled the Byford Dolphin Incident. So there were 4 divers and 2 dive tenders. Truls Hellevik was one of the divers, and yes, the others died, but his death was the worst. Basically, there was a mistake when operating the diving bell, bringing the 2 divers up, Hellevik being one of them. The other 2 men were in the living chambers for the divers sleeping. After the diving bell was connected to the living pods, the hatches were opened and the 2 divers crawled through, exhausted from their 18-hour workday underwater. William Crenham, one of the tenders, opened the hatch prematurely, causing 9 atmospheres of pressure to be exerted on the 4 men. The 80,000-pound diving bell flew about 200 feet at over 100 miles per hour, possibly faster, in less than a second, killing Cramond and severely injuring Martin Saunders, the second tender. The 2 men, sleeping in the pod, died in less than a second, and the other divers died in less than a second as well. However, Hellevik was not so lucky. He was standing directly in front of the slightly open hatch, about 5 inches wide, where he was pulled forward against the hole and having all his abdominal organs ripped out as they flew through the hole, splattering all over the deck. And then his body was folded in half backwards and then pulled through the 5-inch hole, completely destroying his body. All of this happened in less than a second. One that often pops in my head, I have a family member who's a corrections officer in a nearby prison. After asking him how work was, he told me about an inmate who was on high alert because he was threatening to harm himself. After a while there was commotion from his cell block, and he and some other officers were notified to get to his cell to see what was going on. Upon arrival, they found that he stuck his arm up his anus to disembowel himself. Ugh. Almost worse, I was left stunned, but my cousin told me he sees stuff equally as terrible all the time. A guy in my town was brutally murdered for snitching to cops. He was bound and gagged, thrown in the back of a pickup truck, and beaten to death with a 2x4. Rumor was cops knew who did it, but they didn't have the proof to make an arrest. Turns out it was a kid in my grade that murdered him, 10th at the time, and wasn't arrested till after we graduated. Personally, I think the cops were waiting for him to be an adult before they would charge him. Charge him as an adult to get more time kind of thing. Unit 713. During World War II, the Japanese did horrific experiments on live POWs, horrible war crimes, and straight-up torture. Unit 731, by the way. Vivisecting alive patients with no pain control to watch reactions, chemical weapons testing, generic weapon testing, flamethrower, grenades, etc., temperature exposure, frostbite to see what would kill, or with the intent of impregnating to see what diseases would affect the fetus. Just horrible shit. The Japanese, working, basically deny the wrongdoing. They did a documentary, and Yoshiko Ichikawa, a nurse on the unit, denied she knew anything about it and did routine nursing duties. Some teenagers in Odessa, Ukraine were having a New Year's party near the entrance to the catacombs. One thing led to another, and they're daring each other to go in. What you need to know about the Odessa catacombs is they are vast, uncharted, and completely indifferent to your sense of direction or your will to live. Over 1,500 miles of pitch-black limestone tunnels, no GPS, no cell signal, no second chances. They've been used by smugglers, partisans, fugitives. During World War II, Soviet resistance fighters lived down there. Some of their supplies are still untouched. Some of their bones are too. After the party, this girl wakes up hungover and alone in pitch darkness. She starts to wander around by feel, and using the flash of her camera, screams are muffled before they make it past 3 inches out of her mouth. The horror she must have felt. She was found many months later, completely by accident. A lady spilled methyl mercury on her gloved hand. Unfortunately, the liquid went right through and quickly moved into her bloodstream and then her nerves. Over the next several months, her nervous system got worse and worse until she finally succumbed to her illness. Sadly, she knew exactly what to expect, as she was one of the world's top experts on mercury. The handling instructions have been updated to include 2 layers of gloves, one impervious to the methyl mercury. My great-grandfather worked in the oil field. Back then, the wellhead pumps were powered by what they called shackle lines that moved back and forth on supports. Several pumps were powered from a single location called a powerhouse that contained a really big single-cylinder engine and a mechanism that moved the shackle lines. When I say really big engine, I mean it had an exposed flywheel 7 to 8 feet in diameter that rotated 20 to 30 RPM. My great-grandfather was working the powerhouse alone and somehow got his coverall sleeve caught by the flywheel and was repeatedly lifted off the ground and slammed into the dirt floor. He was described as a bag of meat by the people who found him. An Asian woman went shopping with her child. Both took the escalator to the first floor. The escalator had been serviced earlier that same day. However, the maintenance technicians had forgotten to properly secure the plate at the end of the escalator. The mother noticed this when she and her child reached the top. She helped her child step over the plate, but she herself was pulled in. Her entire body was crushed by the escalator's drive mechanism. There was no safety system in place to automatically stop the escalator. I volunteer on ambulances. The one call I'll always remember is a declaration of death we had to do. Typical DODs consist of us going to the caller's location, putting on an ECG, and seeing if there's a sign of life, and then leaving after deeming it's a natural death. The declaration I worked that day was at a chicken farmer's house. We arrived to see that he's made his own heating element for his outdoor bath. The element was poorly made and had many exposed wires and a copper heating element. We find our person lying face down in the flower bed next to his bath, his hands clutching the dirt. When we rolled him over to connect our monitor, we saw dirt in his nose and mouth. When I asked the lady I was working with about what she thought might have happened, she told me he most likely suffocated in the dirt. It picked me up, because then we had to call the police to investigate, and it took them over 4 hours to come. The nearest police station was 10 kilometers away, but that's South Africa. 1. At a coal mine a coworker was previously at. A diesel fitter was setting out to change the cutting edges at the bottom of a bulldozer blade. He raised the blade, but didn't put stands under it. He lay underneath it to undo the fasteners on the back of the blade, not realizing it was creeping down at a super slow rate due to a hydraulic issue. By the time he realized, from feeling it on his belly, he was stuck with the dozer blade between his pelvis and ribcage. His two-way radio was just out of reach. The ground was too hard to dig through, but he tried. They eventually found him with no skin or flesh left on his fingers, chopped in half through the torso. 2. A coal mine I worked at. A tire fitter was rushing a job and didn't put a 2-ton tire in the purpose-made stand to wash it. Left it in the tire handler arms. Turned his back, and it slipped and fell on him, killing him. Same thing happened at another mine next door to the site I transferred to a week after transferring. 3. At a previous coal mine about a year after I left, a dragline crew member was dealing with the extension cord under the machine when a camera box hanging down from the bottom of the knocked him out at the machine rotated. The dragline started walking, and one of the feet stood on him. I can only imagine the mess. 4. At a coal mine my past supervisor was at. A tire fitter was being rushed to change a tire on a dump truck, 793 cat kind of size. The lock ring didn't seat correctly, and during inflation the tire exploded. When they do, debris can be found a few kilometers away. Apparently, he was turned into mince, not able to be identified, and the apprentice lost his arm up to the shoulder. The company kept the supervisor out of jail, and he still pressure tire fitters to cut corners to this day. Missing is a great form of mental health.